Hello, I finally got around to watching Encanto. Now I'm going to talk about it for a while. These are just some thoughts. I'm going to start out with sort of the smaller details that I want to discuss, and then I'll move on to larger observations about the movie itself and also kind of what it tells me about Disney overall. Okay, so to start out, I would like to talk about the visuals and the animation itself. I mean, obviously there really isn't that much to say here that would be unexpected in any way. It's a Disney animated motion picture. It's to the nines. It's top of the line stuff. It's gorgeous. The lighting is wonderful. It is extremely saturated, maybe a little bit too much sometimes. The animation itself, specifically with characters, and I'm including the house as a character because of course it is. The animation is fun, it's lively, it's inspired, it shows a great amount of attention to detail, and it is a very consistent source of clean comedy. And yeah, beyond that, I honestly don't know what else to say. I don't have a ton of criticisms about character movement, environmental designs, or anything, although I will say that, like, the movie, all of it basically just takes place in this little village, a magical village removed from the problems of the world. It's very pretty, it's very appealing, but once I realized as we moved deeper into Act 2 that the whole movie was just going to be here and that there wasn't going to be some big adventure with a bunch of different locations, I was kind of disappointed, and it kind of contributed to me feeling bored by the movie after a certain point. I also think the runtime is a little bit much to ask, especially because I don't think that this story is really, like, complex enough to warrant that kind of runtime, or maybe it's a pacing issue. It just really started to drag for me towards the middle, and it didn't really help that we kept coming back to this location that was just like, fine, I get it, like the house itself, it symbolizes the family, the whole movie's about the family. I'm not saying that it doesn't fit or that it didn't make sense for the story. It was just kind of bland after a while. Like, I got that location in the trailer alone a million years ago, and I was just stuck with it here, and I was like, okay. And I think the team realized this as well, because they do try to deliver some visual variety and some more creative and varied settings, and they almost exclusively do that via flashbacks. There aren't too many of those, or just the musical sequences. Any of the songs, they will tend to, especially towards the middle, when we get into the more abstract subject matter, we get abstract settings, and they can just throw any visual stuff in there that they feel like. Bruno's tower definitely has an adventure feel, and it just happens to be in the magical house, and that works fine. Like, it's magic, you can do anything you want. We get sort of the crawl space, of course, that's a different feel. It's not exactly an exciting location, but it does give us some variety. It doesn't have the natural light that we get basically everywhere else in the movie. They did try to give us some visual variety, and I think they were partially successful, but yeah, it ends up feeling like a very small movie, just in terms of scope. Again, that's not bad, but it also contributed to sort of some of my final thoughts about the movie, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. Okay, visuals, that's that done. Now we're going to talk about sound, and then we'll get to the music right after that. Sound, I want to point out this one thing that I noticed about the sound design in this movie. It was basically a very startling lack of sound design in certain moments, and it felt very strange, specifically in heavy dialogue scenes. The scene where it first stood out to me is when Mirabelle is talking to young boy who's getting his new talent, and they're under the bed and they're having a heart-to-heart. It's like, oh, see, they have a bond. So she's going through stuff, but she's helping other people out. It's a theme. It is so quiet under that bed. It is weirdly, uncomfortably quiet. And I get it. Like, they didn't want to have a bunch of, like, Foley or ambient noises or things in the background to distract from the dialogue. But the really nice thing about ambient sounds most of the time is that we naturally ignore them. We tune them out. But when we go looking for them and they're not there, something must be wrong. The animal brain kicks in. It's like, what? Ooh, oh no, what's coming over the horizon? You know what I mean, though, right? Like, if you're in a room that's dead silent with like no sounds, you can't hear the fridge going. There's no like vents or anything. There's no sounds from outside. It's kind of weird and kind of strange, especially for people used to some kind of surrounding noise, and not having it in certain scenes felt very strange. And I don't completely understand that choice, because this is not something they didn't notice. Like, it's not something they just forgot to do. This really does seem like a conscious choice. So I would be interested to hear the ethos behind that, because personally I didn't really see it. Okay, moving right on to the music, which has score music from some guy whose name I wasn't familiar with, and then we have Lin-Manuel Miranda doing the songs, the lyrical songs that everyone will go listen to millions and millions and billions of times on YouTube and Spotify and everything else. And these songs, I mean, especially the opening number, which they have, they reprise at the very end, as is tradition. It's okay, it's fine, it's upbeat as it should be. It does a lot of information dumping, but very successfully. But then when we get into the specific songs for specific characters, just very bluntly talking about their personalities and personal struggles, we get stuff that I think Lin-Manuel is better known for now, which is attempts to incorporate specifically contemporary pop music into something that we would normally expect to be just traditional musical theater stuff. So we get some like weak hip hop towards the end that I really hated. We just get a couple of straight up belting pop tracks. I'm not going to say that the songs are bad. They're not. They do feel a little outdated and a little bit like out of the loop, like almost like a Kids Bop version of contemporary music in a certain way. But here's the bigger question. As has been talked about just forever, just to death at this point, a big reason why the music of the Disney Renaissance films was so successful is that it followed the standards set by musical theater, and it followed that style too. It didn't really work in a ton of contemporary sounds outside of maybe some weirdo synths and stuff, but it's mostly just orchestration, really lush, classical musical theater stuff. And I do think that's a big reason why those movies as a whole and the music of those movies has held up so well. So what happens when Disney, famous for not rocking the boat, tries to put in very timely music? That music is going to age much, much worse than anything that sounds more traditional, more like musical theater. And specifically the stuff in here that was like the hip-hop flavored stuff and like the female pop star things, and like I think it's gonna age badly, and I would say that that's probably a negative for these movies going forward, because we know how much Disney relies on legacy titles and bringing them back and manipulating people's nostalgia in an arguably unethical way. That's to their disadvantage, because if this sounds cheap and lame 10 years from now, 10, 12 years from now, what do? You know what I mean? Or is their nostalgia marketing stuff and the nostalgia loop so strong that by the time, the music is starting to sound old hat and even worse than it does now, the people who grew up with this movie, maybe they'll already be feeling nostalgic for it and they can just remake it again. You know what I mean? Like, there's a potential safeguard for them there to put in music that's going to age poorly. But for now, I just think it sounds like music that's going to age poorly. For as much as they tried to go in a contemporary direction with some of the backing tracks for those songs, they still ended up sounding a little bit lame. They still kind of just sounded like, we don't really know what's big right now, but we've heard about it from other people. Does that make sense? That's a pretty good line. Okay, that's the music, whatever. The songs, there are a couple of songs I might listen to on my own time. Other than that, I just, kind of, I don't know, made me cringe a little bit. Okay, story overall and messaging, I guess I'll tie this up into one. It's really not anything that surprising. It's themed around emotional intelligence, mental health, basically. Having a support system, obviously family is central to the whole thing in a very literal way. I guess this is the point where I sort of transition to talking about some larger observations about Disney, because I think it's very closely tied to the storytelling here and the messaging of Encanto. I'm not going to say that attempts to introduce some of these pretty basic concepts to a very, very wide audience is a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. Even if you're saying something very basic, if there's some positive messaging there that's genuinely healthy and it has the potential to benefit the people who engage with it, especially young people who engage with this piece of media, that's cool. That's cool. That's a net positive, right? Everything else is irrelevant when we consider that very tangible effect. But the other part of my brain latches on to Disney's very insistent and safe tendency to follow what is already culturally dominant. I hope this makes sense. But like overall, whether we're talking about music, messaging, story, characters, Disney doesn't lead. Disney follows. That's their thing, especially modern era Disney under Bob Iger. They just do what they know is going to be safe, and that definitely goes for representation and messaging as well. We know that they love to market stuff based on supposed progressivism, even though it feels phony most of the time. Disney is the Hollywood king at that. This isn't radical. If we're looking at this movie within a much broader historical context, and if we're trying to consider how we might view it many years in the future, this is not groundbreaking. It's not groundbreaking. And I don't want to discount the positive work that it could potentially be doing right now and for many years to come. But from another angle, I do have to think about how this is the messaging of the movie, because for the past 10 to 15 years, a lot of work has been done culturally by many different people, kind of forming into a collective effort to increase awareness around many of these topics, to attempt to, change how people view these topics, to encourage people to feel more open, about exploring mental health and self-care and all this stuff. It's been a gradual process. That's the only way the culture changes. It's a very gradual process. A lot of people have pushed those ideas forward. Other people have kind of taken up the reins, and we can say at this point that that's a culturally dominant thing, is just these ideals of like self-care, emotional well-being. And if this movie had been made with this exact messaging 15, 20 years ago, we could kind of make an argument that it was ahead of its time, because it was leading something. It was leading the charge into those cultural discussions and bringing awareness to all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. But in this case, no, it didn't do that. All this other stuff happened first, and whoever was kind of driving this, the creative force behind this movie, and specifically the messaging here, they either consciously or subconsciously said, oh, well, everybody's on board with these ideas already. Let's just do that. And then we can market it and say, look how great we are. we're so positive. We care about people, That was a bit of a rant, but I hope my point kind of made sense. And I do think it's important to try, obviously, it's not possible to do accurately, but I do think it's important to try to view a lot of media, contemporary media, in a broader context and think, well, our relationship with this is probably going to change over time. How might it change? And that's just one thing that comes to mind when my brain goes in that direction. And unfortunately for me, the sort of sum total of the movie and my takeaway is not very much. Like, I kind of just felt empty at the end of it. Like I said, it has that smaller scale, and that can have many, many benefits, especially when it comes to character interactions and stuff. But in this case, I think it contributed to me just feeling like, okay, that was that movie, and I'm kind of forgetting it already. I'm kind of losing it already. The details are fuzzy. A lot of the settings get melded together because it's all in the same place. So specific moments are having a harder time climbing up above the others. Still some great stuff. Bruno is the very fun character. They give him all the jokes and everything, and it's kind of a feat for me to enjoy that character because he's played by Leguizamo, and I still have PTSD from watching The Pest that one time. It hasn't become like a lifelong favorite or anything. I'm doubtful that it will really stick in my mind in the weeks to come, but who knows? We'll see when those weeks come. I don't know. I also like the idea of doing multiple videos on a specific piece of media, because then you can kind of chart the evolution of your relationship with that media. So who knows? Maybe I will come back to Encanto sometime in the future if I remember to or feel like it, and we can have a talk again. But right now, that's all I have. Thanks for stopping by.